Hi, everyone. So we are one day after a very important event for our company. Vue Storefront is no longer Vue Storefront right now, and the company is called Alokai. It is very important for us because it has been going on for a while, and the amount of time we've spent thinking about the name, what it should represent. For those of you that any had to do rebranding, you probably know what I'm talking about. It's not an easy task, but at the same time, I'm very proud of what we came up with. And I hope that after seeing our conversation with Philip today, you will also have a much better understanding why we decided to go with that name and what that name actually means. So it is a very big day for us, or it was yesterday. We are a day after that. And funny thing is that we are in the studio that is right after the office. It's above the street from our old office when everything started back in 2017. So how do you feel about this?
Well, I think nostalgic is the right word. Like I still remember when we were there in the basement, like writing the first lines of code, getting, the first projects, seeing all of those contributions, it brings back the memories really. It was, I think, like late November 2017 when we had the first
Official release.
of Vue Storefront, like version 0.1. And honestly, I couldn't imagine that it will go that far. And actually, this is why we chose the name Vue Storefront. Like we had absolutely no idea it's gonna become something bigger.
Yeah, it was quite early, 2017, when we decided to work on proof of concepts. And in general, what we observed back in 2016 is that a lot of our Magento customers they were struggling with mobile experience, with conversions on mobile. So what we wanted to do, we wanted to improve the experience, and that was it. Customizing default Magento frontend was hell, right? It was close to impossible. We would keep on charging the customers for the services, but we could not see any results. So from the very beginning, it was all about putting something better on top of Magento. But what I want you to start with is to tell everyone about the beginnings where we talk about the actual proof of concept in React.
Yeah, that's a good story because like initially, like if you go back to 2017, like the new front-end frameworks, they were popping out like every month or every week. Like at that time, we had absolutely no idea like if it's going to be Angular, if it's going to be React, if it's going to be Vue. So you're just trying to find the best tool to solve the problems. And React was the biggest one at that time. So this is obviously, that was the first choice of us. What we learned is that it was super hard to work with, and at that time, like majority of the developers who would be adopting this also within our company, they were backend developers or front-end developers that had like a very basic knowledge of this modern world of like frameworks like React, etc. But it was just too complex. So we decided, okay, like React, perhaps it's not the best way to do this. So we started to look for something else, and this is how we tried Vue.js, which was like a super small framework at that time. It was just gaining traction, just like 20 other frameworks, and it was a huge bet. But we did that, we chose Vue, and everyone loved it. Like we saw even junior developers becoming proficient in that, like within, I don't know, like 2 weeks. And I think you mentioned about this business reasoning, why we actually started Vue Storefront, but I also want to mention the developer reasoning, because there's a lot of internal motivation to actually did that. People were quite frustrated with the complexity of Magento, also with, let's be honest, like for the front-end developers, like it was using ancient technologies. We didn't like to work with that. And the developers were very unmotivated by this. It was quite hard to find specialists doing that. So there were also internal, but also external reasons to actually do that. And as far as I know, when we chose Vue, it was quite easy to choose the name. Like we already had an internal project called Open Loyalty, which was open source loyalty platform. So we kind of continued this pattern of having like SEO friendly names. So we chose Vue Storefront. And, until now, it was serving quite well. But right now we outgrew it a little bit. So I remember that, like at that time, like separating front end from the back end, it was quite an innovative idea.
Yeah, I don't think we could find anyone we could actually learn from. So we had to do a lot of mistakes ourselves at the beginning.
Oh yeah, we did a lot of mistakes, and that was actually funny because no one really knew how to do that. And we also learned that a lot of people actually wanted to try this. So
Yes.
Vue Storefront was kind of catalyst. So we had no idea how to do this properly, and this is why we thought, okay, like it has to be open source. Like we don't know how to do this, other people don't know how to do this. Like let's learn together and build something. And this is how it started. Like we've put it on GitHub. I think like it got the traction super fast. Like
Yeah.
I think within a year we had, I don't know, like 100 agencies using that.
Yes,
Something like
pretty
that.
much like globally. Yes, it was crazy.
That was super crazy. Like I think no one expected such a huge success.
Yeah, and I think it was honestly like the majority of Magento, because let's remember it was only focused on Magento. So majority of Magento agencies was using that, despite the fact that it actually came from their competitor, because the agency we were at, it was a competitor to all of them, but they thought the product has so much potential, they jumped in. And also looking back, 2018 and 2019, especially 2019, just before the COVID, we did like 30 hackathons worldwide. It was absolutely everywhere, Europe and US. I think we only didn't do hackathon in Australia, like on site, but we did that online, right? So I think that was something that was really blowing our minds about the traction and how fast it was going. So thinking of 2019, this was the time where we also realized that a lot of the customers are coming in and asking, hey, can I integrate this with commerce tools? Can I integrate this with BigCommerce? Can I use it with SAP? So we thought that there might be something much more to it, right? And I think the biggest moment of realization was when I was closing a deal with VF Corp, and the customer, after we basically won it, it was against Mobify back then. I had a dinner with them and I asked them, so what's actually something that would make you pay for it, because they were using our open source version, right? And they integrated with Salesforce, which we had no integration with. They said, Patrick, look, if you would have this in the cloud, you would provide us the integration with Salesforce, with CMS, with search, with payments. We would save so much time and money. We wouldn't have to do that. We would pay you very happily for the license, because then we would focus much more on customization. So it's not like we would take this budget and we just saved like a lot of money. We would just spend this money on actually making something that is going to improve the customer experience, is something that's going to boost our revenue. Because for us, writing another integration, setting up clouds, like hiring all the security ops, DevOps, it's so much time and money. Why do we need to do this? Like we would rather have this in base in the cloud. So this was a moment when I realized that probably there is a very good business model out there that we can follow. But I also knew that we never gonna get the kind of money from an agency, because for them it was a profit and loss analysis, and Vue Storefront was a never-ending story as a project, because we were investing resources in this, but we were not getting any revenue. The only revenue was not from the product per se, it was the services that we sold to the customers that were trying to customize it. So that's how agency was making money. So I'm wondering also, what are your thoughts from like the architecture perspective, and we're going to talk about the spin-off in a second, but when we had people asking for commerce tools, BigCommerce, Salesforce, etc., what were your thoughts from architecture, thinking of, okay, this is how our Magento integration looks like, and that's what our architecture is today. What did you know have to change if you wanted to do it on the larger scale?
Oh, honestly, like at that time, it wasn't that clear. And it's funny that you're mentioning about finding this business model, because like I think at that time I had like a little bit over 1,000 live implementations.
Yes.
Like the traction was absolutely crazy. If I remember right, like for a few months, we're in the top 10 fastest growing projects on GitHub. It is crazy, especially for the e-commerce project. And at the end, like after 2 years, I think we realized that really unintentionally, just from the pure willingness to do something new, we've just created a new market standard. And I think actually one of the reasons why we did that was that we were not thinking that much about the commercial model. Like you're just putting it out there, like talking with the users, like making hackathons with them, discussing exactly as you said, like what are their problems, where would they see the money. So I think that was a very good choice because we learned a lot. And this is something that actually, allowed us to think strategically about, the product that is actually bringing the value. And, from the architecture standpoint, I think like, at least from what we see today and, from today's perspective, I think I knew that at that time, but honestly, I'm not quite sure. I think it was all experimenting and just, figuring out along the way. But how I see today's market is that we have so many great tools, but at the same time, everything is so repetitive in the e-commerce space. Like you literally, when you're starting a new project, like a lot of work is just grunt work.
Yeah.
Like you're doing all the same things over and over again.
Like everyone else. Yeah.
Yeah. And then infrastructure is exactly the same story. Like you're doing this over and over again. So I think that the right vision that we have right now and something that kind of started from, Vue Storefront at the beginning when it was just a boilerplate is that you shouldn't really be doing this groundwork. Like it's just a waste of time. And it also shouldn't be the part that you can even fail at. Like that should be granted. That should come out of the box. Like you should be focusing on the things that actually differentiate you from other businesses that really bring the value, not spending like 70% of the time of development and maintenance on just building the things that other has. And we started that just with the boilerplate, but we went right now into a situation when it also covers the integration, when it also covers the cloud, when it covers all the architecture from top to bottom, when it even covers like UI components.
Yeah.
We try to give as much as possible out of the box so the customers can customize it to any degree and have those building blocks and really don't need to focus on the groundwork. And I think that's the biggest value of Vue Storefront, that it is really allowing you to do crazy things to achieve exactly what you want. But at the same time, it is not forcing you to do this from scratch. Like we have answer for most of the things.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. So basically it goes down to like, we don't want to position it as you either build or you buy. For us, it's you build and buy, right? So we're going to provide you, and that's the piece that you buy, the things that you shouldn't be working on yourself. So basically on day one, you have everything you need. And build, this is where you make your company unique. This is where you can customize, but you also get all the blueprints. I like to call it the cookbook, right? So you get the cookbook from us with different ingredients, but then it's up to you, like what's going to be the ratio of different ingredients, right? But you can always also get our support. So I think this nicely puts us towards the spin-off, right? So after the VF Corp deal, it was quite clear that we have something there. And if companies are willing to use our solution with Salesforce that was never even published and they were willing to do it all on their own, it was obvious the demand was there. So we went back to the agency founders. I showed them the deck where I explained like the business model, and they said, guys, no problem. All you have to do is to find investors that are going to invest because we don't have money for it, which was what I expected. But at the same time, they said, we can't do the spin-off if we don't have investors. We went into fundraising. I think it was the first week of March 2020. And 2 weeks later, global COVID lockdown. And for the next couple of months, it was so difficult to get on the calls with investors because they just didn't know what's going to happen in the economy. But also once we got on the call with investors, everything was fine until they've heard that for them to invest, they will have to invest in the company that doesn't exist anymore because the entity was not set up. And we couldn't do the spin-off without having investors committed, right? So that was a very big challenge, but on the end, we've been very grateful to get like 2 Polish investors that trusted. They also knew the agency founders. They were following Vue Storefront for quite some time as an agency side project. So I think that was super helpful. So we closed our fundraising for seed. It was like $1.5 million in December 2020. We officially started as an independent company on January 1st, 2021. But after we signed the papers with investors in Warsaw, do you remember what happened right after on our way back to Wrocław?
Oh, I really do, because I keep telling the story like all the time to many people. And like it makes a really good story, really. So when we signed those papers, like I think a few months earlier, we applied to Y Combinator, and at that time, I think there were only 2 or 3 companies from Poland that ever got into Y Combinator. So we applied there. We were signing those papers. We were coming back from Warsaw to Wrocław. And during the way, we saw an email from YC that, hey, like if you have a little bit of time today, we would like to have a call. And we were thinking like, oh, so maybe they have some follow-up questions. Maybe they would like us to answer some other
or tell
things.
us, unfortunately, you were declined, but they're nice enough to do it in person, right? Or through the call.
Yeah, so we came back home. I think it took only an hour until we had that call. And then we learned like in a really short, I think 10 minutes call that, hey guys, like you are in Y Combinator.
Yes, it was insane. I barely walked through the door. I was almost late for the call, but it was amazing news. So the same day, we managed to sign off the investor papers, and we knew we were gonna be independent. Plus, we knew we're gonna be starting Y Combinator program right when we are actually independent. So the timing was absolutely awesome. So that's basically how we started. I think in January we had like 7 people on board, like couple people moved from the agency to Vue Storefront, and then we started hiring a little bit later on. So I think when it comes to the achievements so far, so I think what I am very proud of is that we never really dropped the open source heritage. Like it always stayed with us until today. We made a very nice rule that if the backend or CMS or anything else is open source, we also gonna have an open source integration with this. If anything else is only available under the license, we also gonna follow the same model, which I think is also a very fair towards community because this is a very good deal, right? If you are using open source products, we also gonna deliver that to you. As of today, I think we are close to 3,000 live stores, right?
I think we are even above 3,000 live stores.
Even even above. Okay, so that's great. Also, when it comes to the contributors and the overall developer community, what are the numbers for this right now?
Oh, it's hard to count. Like in total, I know that the main repository, it has almost 300 contributors. And I know most of that happened like around 2019 when we had all of those hackathons.
Yeah.
So I remember when we were just going really like every month from one place to another, like there were at least 2 hackathons happening every month. And there were at least like 20, 30 people in each of the places. I think we got in total like more than 500 like unique contributions to the core of Vue Storefront. So imagine like 500 people throughout a year contributing to your project.
Yeah.
Like that was crazy. But I think at this point, like we are around like 300 contributors to the main repository, a little bit above like 10,000 GitHub stars, which is kind of like a mark of appreciation of the open source community. But at the same time, we have a lot of other repositories and integrations that has their own unique contributors. So I think it can easily get around like 400 people in total.
Okay, and what about the Discord? Because like I know that at some point we moved from Slack because Slack started deleting the messages on the free plan, and if we wanted to buy a paid plan for all the community, we would probably go out of business back then. So we moved to Discord. So what about the Discord community? Like how many developers do we have in there?
I think right now it's a little bit around like 4,000, something like that, which is honestly quite a good number. And when you look like how many people are usually online, it's usually like 500. So it's quite good. And you know, like our open source community, it has changed a lot since the very beginning. Like I think a lot of companies who start to be very successful in the open source space and then transition to business, they are having this problem, like this identity crisis. Because at the very beginning, like what you want to do is like you want to be everywhere, you want to build an early traction. Like you really don't think about things that scale, you don't think about the things that bring you money. You only think about, you know, having as many people using your product as possible, like learning from them, figuring out the business model. But once you figure out this business model, a lot of things is changing because very often you learn that the same people who are adopting your product, they're not going to be the people who are going to pay for this.
Yes.
Also, you have your first customers. You have to shift your focus a little bit towards, you know, making them successful, etc. And I've seen a lot of companies in our space, but not only, who actually were undergoing the same scenario. Like you're getting super, super fast traction at the very beginning, then you learn the business model, then you have identity crisis, and you need to figure out like, okay, like, is this open source thing, is it really even work for me? Or is it really, the way how we are doing that, is it really the right one? And in our case, I know that we had maybe like 3 pivots around open source. And right now, the model that you have described, like, it seems super easy. But trust me, like, it's never easy. Every company has to figure this out for themselves.
Yeah, and I think what's very important, and I think what kept us, continuously like going after open source and not dropping it at all, is the long-term perspective. Because we know that the more developers will know us, even from the open source world, at some point they might change the job. They might either join the merchant, or they're gonna change the agency, and that merchant and agency, they're not gonna use Magento or now Adobe. They're gonna go with commerce tools, with SAP, with Salesforce, something else that is actually under the license. So I totally get that perspective, and I think it's important. So now we are nicely transitioning towards the beginning of our enterprise journey. So we had to make the bet when we left the agency, what's going to be the first backend we're going to integrate with. And we decided to go with the backend that is opposite to Magento, which would be truly like API first, right? And we tried to find a company that wasn't like pivoting, because I think everyone is pivoting that direction right now and trying to be composable. And the only company that really resonated with us when we look at the documentation, we spoke with the team, was Commerce Tools, right? So Commerce Tools was a very first backend that we decided to go with. And even though our team is based in Poland, we didn't have any customers in US. We didn't have not customers also, but any people in US, any people in Australia. The very first customer we closed with Commerce Tools was in Australia, and that was Baby Bunting. And this is a situation that I would never even dream of, like how we can even make this happen. We've been like 3 months into the development. We released our MVP. I think we had integration with Commerce Tools as a backend, Algolia as the search. We added Constructor because Baby Bunting wanted to use that, and then we had Content Stack as CMS. So that was like the beginning of the tech stack that we decided to go for. Funny enough, second customer also in Australia, and that was likewise before they were called Brightstar. So 2 very large customers. And if you could briefly describe like what were the challenges that we've been going through, having a product that was basically 3 months in on the market, while we had to deliver that for the customer together with an agency and the customer itself.
Well, I could probably spend an hour talking about that.
Yes.
Like we were very used to a different model of working on collaboration, and working with enterprise businesses, it requires a completely different skills from you, and it requires you to be much more customer centric, much more professional in the way how you deliver all of those things. Like everything has to be top notch. Like enterprise customers require excellence, and in open source, like a lot of things you can get away with. So that was the first shift of the mindset. Like we saw that those customers are suddenly starting to demand like some security certifications, some security audits, asking if we are like PCI compliant, like a lot of new things at that time, really. But I remember the team was working like crazy. Like we are very small, so everyone are acting as like a developers, customer success people, product
solution
people.
engineers. Like I remember in the sales process, we had guys that were working on the CMS integration. They would go and do a demo presentation with me. And after the demo, they would get some feedback from the customer. We had like always Slack channel, very quick feedback loop.
Yeah.
They would go back to development and deliver what the customer asked for. We would show it the next day or 2 days later, and customers like, wow, you guys are working so fast. So I remember the times. I think back then we were already like 15, 20 people. So having developers acting as solution engineers, customer success was absolutely amazing. But I think at some point it also became a problem when we were trying to give them more focus on the development and not to spend as much time on the deals, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I remember, and I think it's worth putting like context of like where we were historically in the e-commerce market at that time.
Yes.
So we have COVID.
Yes.
Right. And in the COVID, like the only good investment from a perspective of almost any company was e-commerce.
Yes.
So suddenly they had this insane budgets for doing things the right way, which was actually composable, and it wasn't like a complete folklore at that time. Like
Yeah.
but
It was
just getting traction.
Yeah.
And COVID accelerated that a lot. And imagine you have all of those API first companies that are delivering just API, and you have a lot of businesses that want to go, that want to launch the e-commerce store as fast as possible. So those API first companies, they were missing something. They were missing a proper acceleration. And this is why we also got such a big traction, because we are actually giving this acceleration.
Yes.
Because otherwise, like what you end up with, like you're building 10 APIs and now just build this. They knew that the time is the essence. So this is why commerce tools and all of those other API first companies, they were coming to us and desperately wanted to partner. And that was super cool. But at the same time, imagine from our perspective, we have a lot of customers that want some features, that are discovering bugs in the product that needs to be fixed, that are giving us feedback that we need to address. We have at the same time our own roadmap, the things that we want to build. We also have new partners coming to us and desperately asking, like, guys, like we have free projects for you, but we just need this integration. We just need a POC. Like we need to show something.
Yeah, and the deadline is next week.
Yeah, next week at best. Like usually it was last week.
Yes.
So that was crazy. That was absolutely crazy time.
Yeah, and going about crazy time, the initial positioning, everyone was talking about headless, and I always have this crazy ideas to go completely out of the box and do something that's gonna be very unique. So while everyone was talking about headless, and I remember it was positioned on our very first Vue Storefront conference. I think it was probably like April, maybe May 2021.
Yeah.
We invested a lot of our tech vendors and solution integrators to help. And I said, guys, we are bodiless frontend. What do you mean? Well, if everything else is headless and you have a headless backend, headless CMS, headless search, whatever, like we are the head. So the head can't be headless, right? So we are bodiless. It's like, oh, this is amazing idea. And I remember when we raised our Series A, there was the article on TechCrunch, and he wrote something around like Vue Storefront is acting as a glue in composable commerce, which is basically what you just said about, being able to connect all of those different APIs together and make it easy for the customers to go live with much faster. But he also said is the walking head. And because I like the Walking Dead TV series, like this is so great, but this is also the journalist skill. So imagine how much our messaging and positioning changed, because at some point we were like, I think we should probably drop the body parts descriptions. And this is why we started thinking about, okay, so what kind of category do we fit? And we realized that there was no category that we are fitting in, right? So we decided to go after frontend as a service. There were some early signs of this category from different analysts, but it wasn't shaped. It was also very difficult to find competitors for us because we're really competing mainly against the custom builds, right? This is what the enterprise customers are using for. So I think this was the right. So you mentioned about the challenges, right? So the first one was obviously, it wasn't not a challenge back then, but we are talking about the COVID boom. All the e-commerce companies were going like crazy. The market was growing much faster than initially predicted by different analysts. But then what we also realized that there was a post-COVID downturn, right?
Yeah.
And we very quickly went from amazing industry, everyone was, doing great, into an industry where people realize, oh, the inflation is going up. Our sales are dropping and our budgets were based on the COVID boom. So different merchants changed their plans for migrations. The projects for migrations were simply not happening. They were also cutting down the development projects for even existing sites. So some of the projects that were ongoing, they suddenly got shut down. So that's what we experienced, or we started in late 2022. And I think 2023 was a big challenge. So at some point we made a decision to actually go a little bit back to the roots and work more on the legacy platforms. So maybe if you could say a little bit about the SAP and decision we made there, but also to talk about your encounters with SAP and Spartacus, why we will still run an agency, because I think not many people know the story, and I like to say that it's our fault that Spartacus is out there, but people don't know why.
It was actually a crazy time, and maybe I will start with this part. So I don't think Spartacus is the only thing that people are not aware of, because when Vue Storefront started, as I said, like it was a truly unique project on the market. Like we're the biggest ones in the world doing that. And because of that, like when other companies wanted to have something like that, we're actually the go-to experts. So imagine a like small agency from Poland in Wrocław is suddenly like a go-to agency to actually build anything headless related. So at some point, SAP itself came to us and they asked us like, hey guys, like we would like to also modernize our stack. We would like to build something like Vue Storefront, but for SAP. And I remember that we even convinced them to do this open source, which was crazy for SAP. And also crazy for any kind of company at that time. Like right now, it feels like something obvious. But just 4 years ago or 5 years ago, like open source, it was super niche. Like I remember that every question that we were getting from anyone was actually, okay, guys, but how do you make money? Like if you give software for free. Right now, there are so many established business models, but at that time, it was crazy. So that was the first thing. Like another thing was Shopware. Shopware also came to us and asked us to build something like that, a Shopware PWA. So with Spartacus, like we started doing this. Like I remember that I was in Montreal for 2 weeks. We had a lot of workshops with their team, like going deep into like, okay, how do we do integrations? How do we do architecture? How we care about performance? How about UI customization? Like really going very deep into how we're gonna build this. And for 6 months, I was in the Spartacus team, like laying foundations for that and constantly discussing how this should look like. But I think then we already knew that we're gonna create a separate company. So I was moved out of the project so I could properly focus on Vue Storefront. But yeah, like Spartacus has roots in Devante and is based on like the first iteration of Vue Storefront, just like many other projects on the market. I think we're also talking with some other e-commerce vendors that I'm not sure if I could actually mention here, but quite big ones. So yeah, we are kind of the reason why Spartacus exists, which is funny because this is right now our biggest competitor in
the SAP market. Yeah, exactly.
And when it comes to going back to the roots, like the first version of Vue Storefront was completely backend agnostic, which means that you can plug literally anything into that, and there is like this little translation layer that is actually changing the data formats of the underlying platform to the ones that are consumed by the frontend. So the frontend is completely unaware what is being plugged into this. And at that time, we were basing this on the Magento formats. And I think the use case that we wanted to fulfill, and that was actually working quite well, was Magento 1 to Magento 2 migration. And we had a lot of projects. Magento 1 was going out of life at that time. So the data formats were quite similar, but not exactly. So Vue Storefront was actually allowing them to gradually migrate. So
first it was like a bridge between,
and then going to the backend. And then going with the backend. And when we started the company, I remember that we had so many integrations, so many APIs. And also, all of them were very unique. They had very unique features. That we decided that, okay, like let's drop this backend agnostic idea because it really doesn't make sense right now. Like we would have to spend months in the basement figuring out how to do this properly while the market it's so heated. So we started to do it like in normal storefronts. Obviously, they were still agnostic in some way. Like they all use Vue.js, they all use our middleware, storefront UI, etc. But we're using like the native data formats. And we also learned very fast that this doesn't scale well, especially when you have like multiple projects. We had like, Commerce Storefront, Magento Storefront, Shopify Storefront. Each of them were totally separate. It was very hard to keep the quality. And we also thought that, like right now we feel what agencies that are working with multiple e-commerce backends feel.
Like especially when they want to do the accelerators, right? And when they want to spread the know-how across different teams. Like we experienced that on our own. Yeah, you're right.
So then we thought, okay, like maybe that idea wasn't that bad, but at the same time, like we cannot execute this while selling so fast, while building everything. So we just allocated a separate team to think about that. And they were thinking about this, I think, for over a year.
Yes.
Like figuring out the data formats, how everything should work, etc. While we're selling those non-agnostic storefronts at that time. And I think at the middle or almost at the end of 2023, we launched the first version of a so-called unified storefront with unified data layer, which was really like the good old storefront. Like it was still using storefront UI, still using middleware. The structure was almost the same. The only difference is that it has this translation layer that is actually translating everything to our own data formats this time. So no Magento, our own this time. And I think that was really the part that made the difference. Like Magento formats were not adjusted to be agnostic. Like we had to come up with this on our own. We had to do a lot of research around all of those platforms. And this time we actually did it right. Like this time we figured out also how to accommodate like a custom use cases, like uniqueness of each e-commerce backend, which is really like the essence why people go into composable. Like they want best of breed. So cutting some features off just for the sake of like universality, it wasn't the case that we could follow. And right now, I think the best positioning for us is really exactly when you need to either modernize something old, but also when you need to migrate from something old to something new.
Yes.
Because then you can do this front end first. And imagine that even if you're doing this right now, let's say without Vue Storefront, what happens is that first, for example, you have some old backend, you're building this front end, and it is very deeply coupled with the underlying APIs and like the way how things work.
Yeah.
So when you want to modernize the backend and move to other, even if you keep the storefront, like essentially you have to rewrite half of this or even all of this.
Yeah, pretty much all of it. Yeah, it's too tight to the previous one. Yeah.
Yeah. Or even if you want to like change the CMS or anything, it is always coming with like a heavy investment on the front end side following this.
Yeah.
So the concept that we have is that like it should be completely decoupled. Like the way how you plug in a CMS at the bottom, you should plug in a storefront at the top. So right now we have this unified storefront that is actually allowing this case. And it is super funny because like technically you can even build most of your storefront without even knowing what e-commerce backend you're going to use.
Yes.
Because then you just plug it in.
Exactly.
It has to only be integrated with the data models, and then you're getting access to the storefront, to all the modules, and to all future extensions that's going to be built. And I think this is super cool.
Yeah, and going back to, initially agencies had to understand and build competences around a certain backend that they would work with. So they would have, I call it guilds, or we can call it teams, right? SAP team, Magento team, Commerce Tools team. And you can't take the developer working on Commerce Tools and drop them into SAP and they're going to do fine. No, it's not going to work like this. With our approach, like as you mentioned, since they don't even really care what's under the hood, you only need to have developers that are specialized in a certain framework. So it's either Vue and React, we're going to mention that in a second, and that's it. But everything under the hood, it doesn't matter for the front-end developers. It will matter for the back-end developers that have to maintain the SAP instance or any other instance, but not for the front-end developers. So now, let's go back a little bit to 2023, the beginnings of it. This is where we decided to launch React, because when we've been going and trying to sell 2021, 2022, especially on the US market, many times we heard, guys, we absolutely love your software. The issue is that our team only knows React and we're not gonna change to Vue just to use your product. So we did lose a lot of great deals just because of that, and we think it's not right because they like it, and we shouldn't be limited with the framework. So I think what you mentioned about unified storefront, it's also allowed us to actually do it properly and avoid to maintain so many different templates, because now we have one in Vue, another one in React, and they are available for all the backend platforms, CMS, search providers. So I think that's a very big and important change, and it really helped us with the go-to-market efforts, especially in the US. So let's have a break right now from all the tech and business, and I would like to ask you, what's your favorite memory from Vue Storefront so far? Like, you can go as far as you want.
Well, I'm quite sure, and like we haven't discussed that before, but I'm quite sure we have both the same favorite memory, and this is the trip to Tenerife that we had when the company was super young.
The Canary
had
Islands.
this idea to have a workation where we gather all the team and they can even get their +1s. Like we go somewhere, we work there, but at the same time we have fun. And it took, I think, 10 days or 2 weeks or something like that. Oh, that was a truly magical time. And remember, it was COVID.
Yes.
So people were, spending most of their time in their houses, and suddenly like we are letting them to go somewhere. And it was the time when vaccines just came out.
Yes.
And for a very short time, and that was funny, like Poland was actually leading in the amount of vaccinated people. So when we went there to the Canary Island, to the Tenerife, like it was almost empty.
Yes.
Like going to the restaurant, we're the only guests. Like everything was basically abandoned, and that was great from the perspective of their law, because they had to keep running those things. Like
Yes.
they had to be open, so they can actually get money from the government. So we're not waiting for anything. And when we were walking those streets, like they were almost empty. Like the beach was almost empty. It was crazy. There was only us and just a few other Polish people. But it was amazing time. I still remember how for the first week we desperately tried to work and have parties.
Yes.
And after the first week, like most of the people, like they just dropped those ambitions. Like they said, like, no, I'm like right now PTO. Like there's absolutely no way I'm gonna keep working.
And I think why it was also very unique. Let's not forget we are remote first company. Like we don't have an actual office where a lot of the people from the company can go to. We have some like co-working spaces here and there for those people that, for example, have kids. I know myself, it's nice to get out of home from time to time and work in peace. But for a lot of people, it was the first time when they actually meet each other face to face, right? In real life, while most of the hiring was happening online, we were all working remotely. So I agree, it was a totally unique experience, and I hope that at some point we can organize it, maybe not for the whole company because we are basically too big for that right now, but so that our teams can go and spend some time. So let's say we can take engineering and they can do it for themselves, product, and they can do it for themselves, go to market. So I think that's absolutely great. So maybe about front-end as a service, right? Because as I mentioned before, there was a lot of thinking about the category, and we already covered that what we provide is this like build and buy. So it's not neither or, it's like both, and you have to understand like how do you mix and match. Also, like it's all about customizing the right things, right? And not spending the time on something that was already delivered. But very often people make a wrong interpretation of front-end as a service as what you see, what you get in the low code. So I would like to understand your perspective on that specific part. Like we saw some companies that try to do it and failed. They sunsetted already. So why do you think people are still trying to understand front-end as a service with this like low code? We also sometimes are asked, so are you like CMS? So it is a challenge for us. So what's your perspective on that?
I think it's a challenge for the whole space, like this modern Mac space. Like I'm part of the technology council, and I am really leading a group that is actually trying to help to understand all of those concepts better. I'm also part of the other group that is having more or less the same goal, but from a more high level perspective. And what we see, and we see this among customers, we see this even within Maha Alliance, that those terms, they are not coined yet. Like everyone has their own understanding. And when you have something new, like every company kind of tries to own that. They try to define that. We are trying to do this too, right?
Yeah.
And there is a constant fight, like, okay, what is front-end as a service? Like, what is DXO? What is DXP? And it kind of just has to coin itself, to forge itself by basically trial and error. So for front-end as a service, I think like the most misleading part is this as a service. Because what you think about as a service tool is basically a WYSIWYG builder. It's exactly that. Like you don't have any like part that you own. You don't have any code. Like you just log in. You have like some kind of drag and drop editor with components. You put them, maybe plug in some integrations, etc. The only issue is that we are talking about the enterprise concept here. So in a context of enterprise applications, this absolutely doesn't make sense because this is too limiting. Like enterprise applications, they are absolutely crazy. Like you have a lot of projects where customers are asking for the things that we even ourselves, like we never did before. Like we literally has to Google what is that, like how to do this properly, do some benchmarks, etc. And I think that's the essence of the enterprise market. Like you cannot just build something that is allowing you to like drag and drop things, because you can never foresee what the customers need.
Yeah.
So that's the misleading part. And right now we are in a funny situation, like when like from the purely definition perspective, like this WYSIWYG builder would fit the best, but at the same time it is absolutely not suited for the enterprise market.
Yes.
So what I think is really like enterprise service is exactly what we've been discussing before. Like you should be able to customize as much as you need, but only the parts that you really need to customize. Everything else like should get out of your way.
Yeah.
So how we see it as a service right now is that, you know, all the infrastructure part, analytics, everything, like it is handled by the vendor. So you don't really care about the infra. You don't really care like where is it's being deployed, how it's being deployed. It just works. Like you put it there and it just works. And everything in this service is very well connected with like the underlying code that you put there. So for example, you know, you have analytics that are automatically reading data from your e-commerce. Like you have a lot of tooling around like scalability and this sort of things that like automatically allow your application to be as fast and as performant and as reliable as possible. At the same time, the application itself, like it also has, you know, a certain dose of black box. Like we have middleware, we have Storefront UI, we have the integrations. They are not just a code that is being exposed to the user. Like major part of this are packages that has the code that is not editable by the user, but we are making sure that they could build on top of that, that each of those parts can be customized. So really like frontend as a service to me right now, in the context of the enterprise market, is something that is giving you enough extensibility and customization capabilities to do any experience that you want.
Yes.
And it's blackboxing everything else. So it is giving you the same advantage as a service tooling, which is basically, it's much harder to make mistakes. It's much harder to have a wrong implementation. Like we're taking some decisions from your plate.
Yeah.
Like we're making them for you.
We think is the best way to do it. And we really invested a lot of time and money into figuring out what's the best way to do it. And we are sure that there is no better way to do it. And that's not something you should be focusing on. So I get this. And how I explain this, and I compare it, first of all, software as a service. And then we can think of it as software as a service, but e-commerce. So we can say like e-commerce backend as a service. So if you think of Shopify, probably like everyone knows Shopify, one of the greatest software as a service companies in the e-commerce space. Can you customize Shopify? Of course you can customize Shopify, right? You take whatever they provide you out of the box, you pay the license, you take Shopify developers, and you customize. You take commerce tools, software as a service, yes. Do they do in-commerce? Yes. Can you customize this? Yes. So what I like to say is that it's a little bit bold, but I compare us to, you know, Demandware, to Hybris and ATG before they all got, like not ATG, but before ATG as well actually got acquired. 99, 2000, 2001, 2002. What they were doing, they were going out to the market and telling to very large merchants, you shouldn't be building backend yourself. We build it for you. You should get a license from us. You should stop spending all the money for that piece and customize on top of our software, right? But it was the backend. We are doing right now what they did more than 20 years ago in the front-end space. So that's how I understand like what we are doing, because again, what we have is software as a service, but because we focus so much on the front end, that's how we want to call it. And also like our definition of front end is changing, right? Because when we started for Magento only, it was a storefront. And again, that's like my personal and how I explain this to everyone because it makes so much sense. Like right now, the front end combines from all the integration or orchestration layer. You have to have the storefront layer as well, and then everything that comes around it that is based on the cloud native environment. So that is what is changing, and that's why we put the as a service to it. So I think it's challenging because we spent probably 80% of our sales process is the education, and then once they get this is like aha moment. Selling the afterwards is very quickly.
Oh, I think you raised a very interesting point that we are also going through a lot of disruption in the understanding of what is actually the core of your stack. Because it used to be e-commerce.
Yes.
And it used to be e-commerce because e-commerce was delivering basically everything. It had front end, it had back end, you were just plugging integrations into e-commerce. Right now, this is all of those responsibilities, they are separated.
Yes.
So you're plugging your integrations into like integration layer. Then you have the front end, which is responsible only for the customer experience. Then you have your e-commerce, which is mostly responsible for like typical e-commerce workflows, basically placing an order, even not that always. So right now the responsibility of the e-commerce is really diminished to like a very basic things. And sometimes you also just plug other stuff into that. But it's no longer, I think, center of the universe. Like the reality is like right now it is just a back office. And maybe this is a bold statement, but I think like front end and the integration layer, this is actually right now the center of the modern stack. And people should be thinking front end first, because this is the part that really influences how your customers are perceiving your application. This is defining the experience of your users. Like your users have absolutely no idea what is your backend. They don't care.
They don't care.
Like they used to care and they used to know what was the backend, not directly, but because it was all coupled. And we knew that some backend platforms had just better capabilities.
Yes.
Or some backends are just faster. But it's no longer the case right now. Right now, it is just a commodity. It is something that you can plug in, plug out. Your users don't realize you're just optimizing your internal processes.
Yeah, and on the end, front end is where you make your money. Like this is what's gonna drive your revenue. So I think this is where the focus should be, and again, that's something we are bringing up to the market. So the question, and I think we never thought about this before. When is the first time you thought, I think we will have to change our name. I think we will have to do the rebranding. What is the very first time you had such a thought?
Whoa, I think it was when we started to think about React.
Okay.
Right? Obviously, like we already knew that if we're gonna launch React, like we will have a huge problem with naming and how to call that. Because how would we call that? Like Vue Storefront for React?
Yeah.
I even saw some people making jokes on Twitter, like, oh, finally, like Vue Storefront for React.
Yeah.
So that was the first time when I thought like, okay, like it's no longer Vue Storefront. Like also, throughout the time, like we grow our offering a lot. Like we're already delivering more than the storefront, but it was still like we're still able to justify that.
Yes.
And I'm talking about only the technical perspective, because I know that there is also a lot of sales perspective in like how you present the value.
Yeah, and on my end, it was actually much earlier. So I was thinking about it a little bit, and I went back all the way to 2019 when we saw a very good traction. And I remember I had some conversations with the US-based customers, and they were saying, "Oh, it would be nice if we had this in React, but no worry, we can do it in Vue as well." But I also knew that in the long run, like even if we would stay open source, because back then again we're not really thinking yet about monetizing, the React and Angular, and there were signs of some additional JavaScript frameworks, I knew that we will have to have more. And with having more, we will have to change the name because the name was so descriptive. So for me, it was actually, back in 2019. So thinking about how the company have changed, we already mentioned that, it is more than a storefront right now. It's also obviously more than Vue because we have React. But what about the product itself, right? So what would you say were like a top 3 or top 4 additional things that we added since we've been offering storefront only to Magento?
Oh, like I think the really like one of the key things, and we actually had that at Vue Storefront 1, but then we dropped it a little bit and rebuilt it, is like the integration layer. So before that, it was quite complicated to integrate everything to Vue Storefront. Like it was really not like a really integration layer. It was just an API gateway. So when we started Vue Storefront 2, when you rewrote it to Nuxt, etc., then we added this middleware concept, which is right now called Vue Storefront Connect, where you can very easily basically plug and play different integrations. They are like working completely isolated, and adding anything is just adding like a few lines of code in the configuration file. So it doesn't require manual work. And I think that was one of the things that really allowed our customers to also understand like what is the value of the product. That it's not only the storefront with the plugged-in integrations, but it's really like the whole integration layer. Another thing is obviously React, right? I think honestly, like that was a wonderful decision, and it also, I don't want to sound cocky, but I think we outgrew Vue.
Oh yeah.
And the reason why we even have such problem is that we're no longer so much tied to Vue.js, and our market is just bigger, and we're starting to see those problems. So This is great. And the third thing is unified data layer, like the thing that was always like something that we're chasing. Yeah. Like we try to be agnostic from the very beginning, as agnostic as possible, but we saw a lot of technical difficulties, and it took us a lot of time to figure this out properly. And I also think that this is the value that is super hard to copy, because we know how much we struggle with doing that.
Yeah.
And I'm sometimes joking with the engineers, because still sometimes are having a lot of discussions and issues like with integrating a certain API and how to do this properly. And I'm always telling them like, guys, like we're not doing this because it is easy. We're doing this because we thought it's gonna be easy.
Yes. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And for me, aside of the product, like convincing people on the market that we have React offering and it's good while being called Vue Storefront is a problem. And no one is going to argue with this. It is a problem, and that is obviously probably one of the most important factors behind the change of the name, so people can look at us differently. Plus, I also think that when you think of Vue Storefront, what I've heard for a lot of existing customers is that at the beginning, before they fully understood the product and the full offering, they thought the value was relatively small, because they thought, oh, it's just a Vue.js framework that I'm going to write my storefront in. That's it, right? So it is too descriptive for what we do, and we added so many additional things, as you mentioned, it just doesn't make sense anymore. So as for the impact, what I think is really changing right now, we are really making it super easy for our customers to implement composable implementations. And it also doesn't matter if they are based on the legacy platform right now. So if they want to stay on SAP, Salesforce, Adobe, or something else, or they're actually going to do full migration and go with commerce tools. So now the question is the actual name, Alokai, right? So there was a very long process that we put into this. We had workshops, then another workshops, and then brainstorming. And then we actually had the pause in 2023 because we had to figure out a lot of things in between, and we thought it's going to take too much time from us. But we released it yesterday at Shoptalk, and we also did a release of our React at Shoptalk a year ago, where we promised we're going to do the rebranding. Yeah. So we realized it would be really crazy to go back to Shoptalk in 2024 when we promised a year ago rebranding, and it actually didn't happen. So it was a very good motivation for us. So I'm going to start with explaining Alokai, and then you can add to it. So Alokai comes from a Hawaiian word called Alakai, that basically means conductor and to guide. But we figured that Alokai has an O because it goes back to our open source community. And we really wanted to make sure that this connection is still there, and it's super clear that we are not dropping it. But also O is the only letter that is in both Vue Storefront and Alokai. Right?
Yeah. And I still remember like we had a lot of conversations how to make this connection. Like at the very beginning, we actually wanted to take the same logotype, this V, and just flip
turn it around, yeah.
Yeah, but then we realized that it's maybe not the best idea. Then we started to look like for a different way of connecting like the old name with the new name.
Yes, and thinking like straight, like we were going after this guidance. The conductor came into our mind through a different brainstorming about the words, because if you think of what we do as Alokai, like we are on the center, and we are making sure that on the end, what matters is the customer experience. So we are coordinating, developers, our API integrations, UI components. We provide architecture principles. We are giving documentation, giving best practices to make sure it's as easy as possible to deliver that customer experience. And then it went even further, right? So how we saw it is that the conductor is standing in front of the musicians, and behind the conductor there is a live audience that is listening to the beautiful music in an opera or philharmonic, right? And then we thought, look, developers, they are like musicians. The instruments, they are like API integrations, all the UI components, architecture, documentation. And then it went even further. What about the sound people? What about the lights people? DevOps, security ops, right? It all started to make so much sense, because what really matters on the end, I am going to listen to the beautiful music, and I don't care how many certain instruments are in there, how musicians are playing. I can close my eyes and just enjoy it, right? So this is the customer experience we are talking about, and that's when we realize like this analogy is making so much sense on what we actually are doing, and it also allowed us to, I think, have a much better story towards the business, because right now it was a challenge to easily explain what we do as the company. But now having this analogy with an orchestra, the conductor, musicians being developers, makes so much sense, right? So what are your thoughts on that change?
Oh, I think honestly, like from the storytelling perspective, like this is something that we're missing, and this is something that the name Vue Storefront, like it's cool, but it is cool for the developers, but it's not telling the story. And there are two things that I love about that. Like, first of all, it is immediately obvious, like, what is the value. Like, imagine that you have a great, like, you're a compositor and you compose a great song. Like, so if you want this to be performed, like, would you build the whole building? Like, would you decorate it? Then would you do auditions for each of the musicians separately?
Yeah.
And then hire a conductor and then, sell the tickets and like do all of that just to do one performance?
Yeah.
Or would you just give what you have written to the best possible orchestra in the best possible place and just let them do the work? And this is exactly what is the difference between like building everything custom and doing it with Vue Storefront. And I think, it goes on many levels, because also all of those things are repetitive. Like, you can set this building from scratch. You can do all of those from scratch, but this is not something that would differentiate you.
Yes.
Like, the thing that would differentiate you actually how it's being performed. And this is what we are taking care of. Like, we are this conductor of customer experience. We are taking care of making sure that what you want to build is being built in the best possible way. It's being performed in front of the users in the best possible way. And it is also having this technical bit. So like the orchestra, it is like the conductor is leading the orchestra, and the orchestra is coming also a lot in the technical talks as orchestration.
Oh, yeah.
So orchestration is basically kind of like a workflow. So when you orchestrate different data sources, you're kind of ensuring that each of the data sources, like for example, on the checkout, like you want to call first the payment service, then you want to tell the backend that the payment was successful, then you want to place an order, maybe you're going to the order management system. Like each of those things, they have to go in the right order, in the exact right time. And this is exactly what we are doing. Like we are orchestrating, but not only the data. Actually, we also orchestrate data, but as a bigger picture, like we orchestrate the whole experience. Like we're making sure that all of the things are in the right place, like they're being called in the right time, because we are setting up the right architecture for our customers. And we're kind of making sure that they won't make the mistakes that they could normally make.
Yeah.
And I think this is super cool, because we have both technical bit and the business bit in here. Yeah. And this is really something that we always wanted. Like we have developers in our roots, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So to summarize, because I like what you said. So we can think of our customers, merchants, the e-commerce business owners, as compositors, like composers, right? They are the ones. This is the build part, right? You have to write your own music. You have to make it unique, right? It's up to you what you believe is the best for your audience, which is the users coming to your site. And we are giving you the buy option, which is the whole building. So you can think of it as infrastructure and all the elements, musicians, the lighting, all the equipment to then perform it without having to worry about stuff like that. Also, as I'm sitting here look, like we got all this equipment. Like we have the microphone, there is a person sitting there making sure like all the lights, all the audio, everything is there. Like we didn't have to like build it, right? Like we basically came here and we bought the whole setup, so we don't have to worry about this. What we are building is the story. We are telling right now about like Vue Storefront transitioning into Alokai. So there's a lot of analogies that we can think of, but it just makes so much sense in what we do and how customers should think about working with Alokai going forward. So what are the things that you are looking forward as the founder and the CTO of Vue Storefront, thinking that now it's no longer Vue Storefront but Alokai?
Whoa, honestly, like especially this year, like there's a lot of technical things I'm looking forward to, and I'm not sure if I can like talk about all of them, but
maybe not all, but like some of it, yes, because we have some exciting things that we are still having the cooking as R&D, so I wouldn't mention that yet.
Yeah, like first of all, like this change of the naming, it comes in the very right moment when we actually can tell that all of the pieces of our product, they're very much aligned with each other right now. They're really working as a service. So it is also like the right time to announce this to the world. At the same time, we are having a lot of experiments with AI, like everyone.
Yes.
But I think we also learned a lot about this technology, where is really the value, and how we can connect this value with the value that we are delivering. So basically acceleration of developers' work, for example. And I won't be spoiling what we are building, but I can already say that it is something truly unique for this market. And it is also something that will definitely bridge the gap between no-code editors that are giving you a lot of acceleration, that are allowing you to go into the market very fast, but are very limited and don't give you any kind of ownership, and the like 100% coded solutions that are allowing you to do the craziest possible things, are giving you 100% of ownership, but at the same time, it just requires time to maintain it and to build it. So I think AI is actually allowing to bridge this gap. And also, we don't want to get rid of developers. What we really want and what we really try to do all the time with all of our tools is to increase their efficiency.
Yes.
And I think that would be a huge breakthrough. And as you know from my title, I'm obsessed about developer experience. And developer experience is nothing else than developer productivity. So if everything is well documented, if there is not much context switching, if the code is readable, this is directly driving their productivity. And this is something that we're always craving for at Vue Storefront, like to make developers as productive as possible, to let them build custom experiences, but without really paying the cost of building custom experiences and owning this.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I'm excited about. Another thing is, can I talk about e-commerce intelligence?
A little bit, yes.
Okay, so I will just talk a little bit about that. Another thing that makes us super unique is that we know a lot about you. Like, because you are using our connect layer, because you are using our frontend, because you're using our infrastructure, we have so many insights into like what is happening there, how your users are interacting with the page, how the technology itself, like performance, is influencing that we can give you a lot of actionable insights into what you should improve to actually grow your revenue faster, to increase your conversion. We're able to spot actually the places where the conversion drops are the biggest and immediately come up with solutions like, okay, so we saw this correlation, so it can actually allow you to bring the value faster. And this is the value that is coming from your developers. So right now, developers, it is not so trivial to justify the value. And imagine that you will be able to tell you like, this is the place where you're using like $100,000 a month.
Yes.
And we are automatically creating a ticket for your Jira. Developers are fixing this. And right now we have a justification for those developers. And there's a lot of money laying in there. And we are quite sure that developers are bringing a lot of value. But right now we're also have that to be quantified.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it all makes sense. So from my perspective, first of all, I really want to see what's going to be the overall market feedback because, making such a big change in the name and also the narrative around this, I think it's going to make a very big difference for a lot of our partners and customers. I also want to see how it will impact our operations in the US because we are doubling down on that market this year. And I think the traction we are seeing already, and we are only in mid-March, is absolutely fantastic and is only gonna get better. But I want to see the boost after the rebranding and the new name, right? Because again, I think it's gonna make a very big change. And going back to like what I'm excited for and what are the next big things. So you mentioned we are working on some very interesting stuff with AI. I think commerce intelligence is probably one of the best things we are going to launch this year. And I'm talking from a perspective of the actual business value. And to summarize this, it is giving the tech teams a very easy way to prove their value to the company, because right now it was very difficult. And we want to be sure that they can go back after, let's say, a certain quarter and say, this is how many things we solved. This was the revenue impact we had at the company. They don't really have a possibility to do it right now. So yeah, I think that's it. So thank you for going back with memories all the way to the start, and I'm really looking forward to see where Alokai is gonna get us, because the Vue Storefront chapter of the company is now over. And for everyone, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it a lot. Of course, if you want to talk with us, you can always contact me or Filip directly, either through LinkedIn or through our website. If you wonder, what Alokai really is, and you want to dive deeper, we are always more than welcome to have a conversation. But also, what I would be very excited about is to hear your feedback. Like, what do you think about Alokai and our analogy with an orchestra, with conductor, with musicians being developers? Does it make it easier for you to understand what we actually do? Is there something we should be explaining a little bit better because it was not clear? So yeah, stay with us, because there is a lot of exciting things coming up this year. Thank you, Filip.
Thank you.